Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. We wish to thank our generous underwriters, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Today on Oklahoma Gardening, host Casey Hentges has a couple of plants from the Oklahoma Proven program that are looking great this time of year. In the greenhouse, we plant some seeds of future garden transplants. We make a handy dibble board to assist with planting. And Barbara Brown has a tasty recipe.
It's hard to believe, but we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Oklahoma Proven program. This program was started as a marketing and also a plant evaluation program to help Oklahomans choose the best plants for their home gardens. Plants are selected for their many attributes, but especially those that are well adapted to the varied environmental conditions that we know Oklahoma has. Now, they also are selected off of wildlife attributes. Some of them are drought tolerant, and many of them are native plants as well. In celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Oklahoma Proven program, you're going to see us highlight several of these plants that have been selected over the past 20 years this season on Oklahoma Gardening. To kick it off, we're going to look at Ilex decidua. This beautiful deciduous holly behind me here has beautiful berries that persist throughout the winter months, but are also an attraction for wildlife. If you purchase a cultivar called Warren's Red, then that ensures that you're buying a female plant. You still will need to have a male plant in order to pollinate it to get these beautiful berries. Now, Ilex decidua gets to be about 8 to 12 feet tall. It is a native to Oklahoma, and it handles poorly drained soils as well as drought conditions and our Oklahoma heat. It's time to start planting those transplant seeds, and so we've pulled aside the seeds that we're looking at propagating right now or germinating, and that's our broccoli and our cabbage, which are cool season crops. And then we're also going to go ahead and seed our tomatoes and a few of our peppers as well, and these are warm season crops. Now, we're doing them at the same time, knowing that we're going to be putting our cool season crops out in the garden around mid-March, which is toward the tail end of when you can. You can really plant cool season crops from mid-February to mid-March. Our warm season crops, while we're going to go ahead and get those started, those won't go out until the garden until about mid-April. Now, typically you want to go ahead and start your seeds about 5 to 7 weeks prior to when they will go out into the garden. So we've got our seeds pulled aside. Now, how do we plant them? Well, we all learned at an early age what a seed needs in order to grow, and that's moisture, temperature, sunlight, and something to anchor that seed. Also, plants need nutrients, but at this point, the seeds don't have any roots, and so we're not concerned about nutrients at this point. Now, let's look at the soil first of all. What are we going to need? Well, of course, we're planting in containers, so we never want to use any garden soil or topsoil. What we have here is a seedling mix, which is a very fine mixture, and so it'll really allow those new sprouts to come up through the mix pretty easily. So we've got this in here. Now, there's a couple of different containers that you can also use as well. Some people prefer to plant in something that's an open flat like this, where they'll just seed it. They might seed it into rows, or they might scatter their seeds all over. But at that point, you're going to have to then separate them and then pot those up. Some people prefer to put something in a bigger one. You might put a few seeds in here. Or you can also use peat pots, which are really nice because when you plant in these can be directly planted into the garden. You might just pull a little bit of the bottom to allow those roots to get growing into the garden soil. There's also some of these peat pots, which are little pelletized, compacted, dehydrated soil, and they're kind of got a little net around them, but once you put them in water, they'll expand and then you can put your seedling in there. So there's a couple of different options. What we're also using here today is a cell pack. Now cell packs, again, come in a range of cells. This is the one that's used in a more of a commercial situation that has 72 individual cells that you could plant. Now this is really great if you're ever going to have to move a lot of plants at one time. So we have 6 different plants, so we have 6 different cell packs here that we're going to plant up. Now the first thing that we want to do before we introduce any seeds into our mix is water this pretty thoroughly. And that's so that we know the whole soil profile is saturated with water, and we don't have to worry about watering it later and then running the risk of losing and washing away our seeds. So we're just going to water this in. Now that you can see our potting soil is nice and saturated, and you want to give that a little time to soak in because it can take some time to rehydrate it. We're going to plant our seeds. A couple of different ways to make our holes. Some people just prefer using their finger to stick in there, and with our seeds they're pretty small, so we're only going to go about 1/2 inch. Or you can use a pencil to do that, such as this. Or if you want, you can use a dibble board. A dibble board is just a dibble that has been attached to a board. So we've got 6 here that is made perfectly for a 6-pack. And we're just going to press that down on there. And then we've got 6 uniform holes made for our seeds to go in. And the nice thing about this is we know they're a uniform depth versus your finger or pencil, it might be a little bit less uniform. Having a more uniform depth will also increase the germination uniformity as well. So we're going to start with some Catarina cabbage, which is a nice cabbage that makes small, round 4-inch heads. And you can see that these are really tiny seeds. Now the big question is how many seeds to put in each hole. It all depends on your confidence in the viability of that seed. If you have older seed, but you have a lot of it, the germination rate might have fallen. And so in that case, you might want to put 2 seeds per hole. Now, knowing that you're doing that, if both of them germinate, then you might have to clip one of those or pinch one back. And so you're sacrificing one plant if you have 2 seedlings come up. If you have newer seed, such as what we have here, and you have fewer of it, then you might want to put 1 seed in each hole so that you can grow as many plants as possible. And that's what we're doing here. We're just putting 1 seed in each hole. Now the second thing that we're going to plant here is a broccoli called Artwork. And again, a very tiny seed that we're just going to put 1 in each hole. Now we've got 2 different varieties planted, and before we go any further, we want to go ahead and get those labeled so we don't forget what is what. So first off, we planted some Catarina cabbage, and you want to make sure that you always put the date that you have seeded those as well, so you kind of know when to expect to see them to show up. And because we have 6 different varieties that we're planting here, we don't necessarily need to label each individual cell. We're just going to label each packet. So we've got our seeds backfilled, and we're just going to add a little bit of water on top of there to kind of settle that soil in around those new seedlings. But we don't have to water too much because we know all of the media is nice and wet. All right, now that we've got it nice and moist, we want to make sure to maintain that humidity and that moisture, and there's a couple of different ways to do that also. For something like this, you might have a plastic tray that you could put on top of it. You just want to be careful and make sure you check it quite often because these can get pretty hot. So as soon as those little seeds start sprouting, they can bake if you don't check it frequently. If you don't have a plastic lid like this, there's a couple of other home methods you could use, such as plastic wrap. You could just drape that over the top of it. If you have plastic bags, you can also use those by covering your pot with a plastic bag and maybe putting a rubber band around it to secure it a little bit better. But that kind of acts as a tent or a greenhouse effect over those seedlings. There's also another way you could do this, and that's to plant in one of those takeaway containers or something. You could plant this, leave some room for your seedlings to germinate, and then cover it with the lid like that. For a container like this, you want to make sure to add some holes into the bottom so that it allows for drainage. But other than that, these work really great, so you might save those containers. Now that we've got ours planted, we're going to go ahead and transfer ours to our growing station, our germination station, which is over here. We've got some nice grow lights above it, so it'll get plenty of light. If at home you don't have grow lights, you might look at a west or a south facing window where they're going to get plenty of sunlight. And we also have some warming pads here. Now for germination, most plants like a germination temperature around 70 to 80 degrees, and that's a consistent temperature because we want to keep that soil profile nice and warm. If you keep your house around 70 degrees, that should work, but a heating pad just allows for a little more control over that temperature. Now there is a difference between a germination temperature and a growing temperature. Once these start growing, the plant can allow for a little more flexibility in that temperature, just like it would be growing outside. Our nighttime temperatures dip a little bit, so it can handle that. So it's more for germination that we want 70 to 80 degrees. For more information on how to start your own transplants, check out this fact sheet. It's that time of year when we're planting transplants, and we have a little trick that might help ease that process. Now you might be familiar with this. This is called a dibble, and basically it's a hole punch for the soil. This particular type of dibble is often used for bulb planting, but today we're going to make a dibble board, and this is an example of a dibble board here. And what this is this is the measurements we need for our 6-packs that we often plant in. So you can customize it to what you might plant in. But this is a 6-pack, and basically the dibble, if you push it down on the soil, you have uniform holes in each one of your 6 cells at a uniform depth. And all of this will help with germination as well, making sure that those seedlings are at the right depth. You'll see those seedlings come up at about the same time as well, so you'll have more uniform germination. Now, how are we going to make this? Well, the first thing that you want to do is get a scrap piece of wood, such as this right here. You can use scrap wood, you can use plywood, it doesn't really matter. You want something that's not warped or bowed too much, because otherwise it'll kind of wobble on your 6-pack. So when we have a board here, we're going to place this down here, and we're going to get our 6-pack and turn it over on top of that. And then we're just going to measure how long our 6-pack is. It works out that ours is actually the correct width. Now, of course, if it wasn't, you would want to measure that side as well to cut any width off of it. All right, now the next thing that we need to do is figure out where our actual pegs are going to go in our dibble board. And we're just going to kind of eyeball this. The nice thing about our 6-pack here is they have holes in there for drainage. So using a marker, because it just makes easy marks, we're going to kind of go down the center of each one of these and put a little point. All right, now that we have that done, we're going to take that off and kind of see if our spots were about accurate, and it looks like we might adjust those a little bit. You can always measure those a little bit as well and kind of see where they should be in the center. So we're looking at about a 1.5 inch mark from the outside. So 1.5 inch. So we're about right there. It's not an exact science. That's the nice thing. The seeds will germinate as long as they're in soil. So now that we've kind of got our marks made, we're going to go ahead and cut this off and drill our holes. We've cut cut our board and we've drilled our holes using a 5/16 inch drill bit. And that's because we're using a 5/16 inch dowel rod to make our actual dibble holes. Now, again, if you had a larger seed, you might want to think about using a larger dowel rod or something. The other thing that's out there and available are these dowel pins that are used to hold wood together if you're a carpenter or something, but these work well too. They're nice and rounded. So that's another option. They come in different widths and also different lengths. Now we're going to need to cut our dowel rod to the length that we want. And you might keep in mind that when you're doing this, you might just do it a little bit longer because sometimes there's a lip on these. And so the dowel probably won't go in the whole depth that you're expecting it to go in. So we're going to do ours at about 3/4 of an inch, and we're going to need to add that to the depth of our board, which is also 3/4 of an inch. So that's going to give us a dowel length of 1.5 inches that we need to cut. So we'll make 6 measurements of 1.5 inches and cut those. Now that we've got our 6 little dowels, our pegs that will go on our dibble board cut, we're going to go ahead and start painting those with some wood glue. And you'll notice we drilled all the way through our board, and so that means our pegs are going to go all the way through. So we'll just need to paint a little wood glue on each of these and try to get a little in the holes as well. And then we're going to use our mallet to hammer those all the way down in there. Now you'll notice your moment of truth is how steady your hand was with your drill as to whether your holes are straight or not, or your pegs are straight. All right, now that we've got those pegs set in there with glue, we of course need to let this glue dry a while, so we're going to just let that set for probably about 24 hours. We have one here that we've had drying, and so these pegs are nice and solid in there now. Now, if you've noticed that you didn't cut yours quite straight, and even if you did, it still helps to kind of round out those edges just to make them a little bit smoother. So I like to use a little sandpaper to round out those edges. If you have a peg that's a little bit longer than the rest of them, again, you can use sandpaper to take that down. So a 1-hour project now will help save you time later when you're planting those seeds. Here we have another Oklahoma proven, and this is a perennial, so that means it'll come back year after year. Now it blooms pretty early. This is called Helleborus, or also commonly called Lenten rose, or sometimes known as Christmas rose, and that's because it can bloom anywhere from Christmas all the way into Easter. You can see it has, this particular one has beautiful blush colored flowers, but the flowers can vary anywhere from a green to a cream into purples and reds as well. There's also a few yellow varieties out there. More and more cultivars are being selected for having an upright flower to kind of show off a little bit more. But this is one that's going to bloom early in your garden before anything else is blooming. Now, prior to it blooming, you're going to have evergreen foliage that you're going to see in your garden through those winter months. And this is one low maintenance perennial that you want to add to your shade garden, because really the only maintenance that it requires is coming back through and cleaning out some of this dead foliage or the older foliage and just cleaning that up to give it a nicer appearance. This is going to have a lovely bouquet of flowers in the center here, and then once this is done, they're going to potentially seed even more plants for you throughout the season. Hellebore is a great perennial to add to any woodland or shade garden.
Today we're going to use cabbage in a meal. Now, many of us are familiar with cabbage. A lot of us think of it as old people food or peasant food, and we don't like it real well, with the exception of maybe in coleslaw. So we're going to try something different. We're going to do an egg roll bowl meal using shredded cabbage as part of that, because that's an often used ingredient in an egg roll. The difference is we're not going to put it in a roll and wrap it up. We're going to serve it in a bowl. So I'm going to start with 2 teaspoons of canola oil. You could use regular vegetable oil as well. When that gets just a little bit hot, I'm going to add about 3/4 of a pound of ground pork. Now you could use other kinds of meat as well, other ground meats. You could use chicken. I've tried it with beef. It tastes good. It just doesn't taste like an egg roll. Beef doesn't take me to that part of the world. Pork is a really commonly used type of meat for that though. There are different types available in the market. This one is a 93% lean, so I shouldn't have to drain it later. If you use one that's got a higher fat content, I noticed in some stores the fat content was up to 20%, so as opposed to 7. So if you get one with a higher fat content, go ahead and use it, not a problem. Just make sure that you drain the fat off as it goes. You want to break this up while it cooks, and you want to cook it until it is thoroughly cooked, which if we could use a thermometer on ground meat, which would mean we could cook it to 160 degrees. Thermometers don't work well with ground meat not formed into patties, and so we're going to have to use color, which is not a good way to determine doneness. But we're going to cook it until it's no longer pink, and it's going to continue to cook a little bit longer after that. So I'm not worried that we're going to end up with pork that's a little bit underdone. People often tend to cook pork much more than it needs to these days, but once it's been ground and microbes can have the opportunity to be combined in with it, no matter what kind of ground meat you're working with, it needs to come up to 160 degrees. So keep breaking that up as it goes, and when it gets to its end point, we'll come back and take the next step. All right, to this I'm going to add around a teaspoon of garlic, 1 clove. That is always going to vary depending on the size of the clove that you happen to be working with. Also, I've got a teaspoon of minced ginger. Now you could go ahead and grate the ginger as well. Use fresh ginger because the dehydrated ginger is really not a substitute. And also 1/4 of a teaspoon of black pepper is going to go in here. We're just going to cook this really briefly, about 30 seconds, just so those aromatics begin to work. Again, we're going to keep adding more ingredients and building flavors in here. When you buy the ginger, don't buy a lot unless you use a lot of ginger. A little nubbin like this, I only used about 1 inch to do what we're doing here, twice. So a little tiny piece won't cost you very much, should cost you less than 50 cents, and it will prevent you from having to throw it away again later. All right, next ingredients we're going to add to this. Let me get the last of the good flavors off of that spoon. I'm using 4 cups of coleslaw mix. If you want to just go ahead and shred up cabbage, that's perfectly fine. You can do it that way too. And then I'm going to add 1/4 of a cup of sliced green onion. Notice these are all the flavors that you're going to get when you go to your favorite Chinese restaurant and get egg rolls. That's one of my favorite things to do on Friday night is Chinese food. So egg rolls are always included. So this is a nice middle of the week way to have some of that kind of experience as well, or if you live too far away from the Chinese restaurant. So this we're going to cook for about 4 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes. Keep your eye on it. You don't want the cabbage to completely wilt, but you do want it to wilt a little bit. You want to keep some of the crunch in there. All right, I've got a tablespoon of a light soy sauce because we're going to add a little bit less sodium to this because we've got a lot of flavors already built up in here. And then a teaspoon of toasted sesame oil. We're going to stir those together. Basically, this is done. We're going to take it off the heat, make sure they get blended together real well so that all the soy sauce isn't in one bite and not in another one. Oh, it smells terrific now. If you can't find toasted sesame oil, you can use regular sesame oil or you can leave it out. It does add a texture and a mouthfeel to it, so I would probably use plain if I couldn't find the other. And then we have brown rice, 1/2 cup of brown rice per person. And we're just going to serve this over the top. And this becomes our egg roll in a bowl. A little bit more green onion over the top of that. And there you go. Chinese dinner when you weren't expecting it. I hope you give this one a try. For Oklahoma Gardening, I'm Barbara Brown.
There are lots of great horticultural events this time of year. Be sure and consider these activities when you're making your plans for the weeks ahead.
Next week, we have more great information to get your vegetable garden started. Casey will have the ins and outs of seed starting kits, from the simple to the fancy. We construct a hay bale cold frame. There will be tips for growing onions, and Casey has the top 5 easy vegetables for beginning gardeners. We hope you join us then for more TV you'll grow to love. To find out more information about show topics, as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure and visit our website, oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussions on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows, as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater jewel. We wish to thank our generous underwriters, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is provided by Pond Pro Shops, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, and the Oklahoma Horticultural Society.